I want very much to thank the University of Technology, Sydney, for hosting the event, for the graciousness with which they have done this, and for all the preparation that they've put into this particular occasion. Of course, I'd like to thank Mary Kane for her very gracious introduction and the very insightful words with which she introduced both the book and our guest speaker. And of course, I want to thank Helen Clark, about whom quite a bit has already been said. She has made a wonderful contribution, not just to New Zealand, but to the Asia-Pacific region over many, many years, and indeed on the global stage. As she remarked a moment ago, I have known her for over a long period of time, and mostly have observed her contribution from the distance, but occasionally meeting and comparing notes. And I do recall our conversations, which were a little more frequent prior to the advent of the Longi government in New Zealand, when certain things began to change. Helen Clark, like Jim and myself, had a strong interest in the nuclear issue, a long-standing interest, which was able to be proceeded with once the Labour government came to office. But of course, her range of interests is much greater. And I think we've seen something of that in her comments this afternoon, which is why when Jim and I were thinking about whom we might approach to launch the book, we made lists, many lists. But I want to tell you that Helen always was the number one in terms of whom we would approach. So we were in the very lucky position that our very first choice was able to be realized. We are proposing to have a launch also in Melbourne. We will have to settle for whoever is number 2 or 3 or 4. Of course, I need to thank also my co-author. We've known each other for around about 35 years, give or take. Well, actually 35 years. And it's been a very good and long-standing and close relationship. But if anything has stretched the friendship, this book has. There's no question of that. You'll be pleased to hear we're still very close friends. It didn't always look as if this would be the case. But 7 years in the making, and I think well over 60 meetings to discuss various aspects of the book, not least that dismal part of it, namely the preparation of the index. But be that as it may, let me just say a couple of words about the book. I'll be very brief. To put it simply, we thought that we are living through such momentous times that it would be appropriate to place the book within its proper historical and, for that matter, evolutionary context. And as time went on, we were increasingly persuaded, and this is very much the thesis of the book, that we are living through a moment of transition, which is as significant as any previous transition in human history. That the period of transition that we're going through is likely to prove as significant as the transition which ushered in the agricultural revolution and much later the industrial revolution. In fact, my own personal assessment is that it'll prove more significant than the period of about 150 to 200 years which saw the world dramatically transformed from the latter part of the 17th century to the 19th century, which ushered in, if you like, modernity, the modern world. The thesis is that we are moving towards a world beyond the modern world that we have known, and that many of our institutions were in fact created primarily in 16th, 17th century Europe. And one of the key institutions, of course, is the modern, what we've known as the modern industrial sovereign national state, which remains highly significant. But it lives in a radically transformed world, and it has to coexist and relate to an extraordinary range of institutions and social, political, and economic actors which were scarcely imagined in the 17th, 18th centuries, let alone before that. So what I think we're trying to say is that to make sense of the world in which we live, we need new lenses. We need new lenses which interpret this transitional moment, which has probably been going on now for the best part of 7 decades, and my hunch would probably last another 2 or 3. It will be a transitional period of about a century. And at the end of it, the world will be radically different, for better or for worse, than the modern world that we have known from the 16th, 17th, right through to the 20th century. The picture is greatly complicated by the fact that, and Helen has already referred to this, a very profound shift, geoeconomic and geopolitical, as well as cultural shift, that is occurring in the world. The most dramatic manifestation of this, possibly not the most important, is the decline of the United States. In my view, steep decline. Demonstrated most dramatically at the recent Copenhagen conference, when literally the Prime Minister, not the President of China, refused to see for a period, a critical moment in the Copenhagen conference, to meet with the President of the United States. That's just symbolism. So we live in a world which is, in one sense, much more diffuse, where power and authority are much more diffuse. But we live also simultaneously in a world where there's a greater sense of unity. There is only one climate change predicament confronting the world, not 10. The problem which still remains with us, the possibility of a nuclear exchange, would be a global problem. The problems that Helen Clark's organization, the UNDP, faces are global in their nature, their scope, and their implications. So global problems, global challenges, but in a world which is not necessarily unified. So to conclude what I wanted to say, we live in a world where the challenge to our institutions, local, national, regional, and global, is how to reconcile the demands of an increasingly global and unified world, technologically, economically, environmentally, and in so many other ways, with the reality that we live in a world that remains religiously, ethnically, racially, culturally, and politically fundamentally diverse. And how that reconciliation between the singular, one world, and the plural, many, many different kinds of worlds, with many different histories, traditions, aspirations, cultural resources, how to make those two, the one and the many, reconciled in a constructive way that can see us through this moment of transition. If the book helps us to understand even just a little bit better than we might otherwise do the nature of that transition and how we might respond to it in the future, it will have amply served its purpose. Thank you.